we humans have to humble down a little bit and understand that we have a lot to learn. And it's not that we are learning from nature, it's that we are learning with nature because we are embedded in that nature. And in a way, what we're seeing is that nature invests in itself.
Welcome to Investing in Regeneration. This podcast is about changing how we understand, plan, and finance projects so that finance becomes a driver for better decisions, not just the last step in the process. In each episode, we unpack a real deal or initiative through three lenses: understanding, planning, and financing. We explore how it came about, who worked together, and what needs to change for these innovations to become mainstream. Because the real bottleneck is not capital. It is how investments are originated, structured, and brought to bankability. Our financial systems can do more than financing change. They can help shape it. Good afternoon, Sidney. Welcome to Investing in Regeneration. I'm very, very happy to welcome you, Sidney, and I'm sure all of our listeners will enjoy this talk. Before we start, I would like to introduce you. Sidney is a serial regenerative entrepreneur, investor, and innovator dedicated to advancing the emergence of economies of life in the Americas and Europe. Over the past 7 years, she has focused on framework thinking innovations and practical approaches that enable individuals, organizations, and investing agents to contribute more consciously to regenerative processes. With nearly 15 years of experience across business innovation, entrepreneurship, and investing, Sidney brings a unique combination of strategic insight and hands-on regenerative practice. Her work is grounded in both real-world experimentation and ongoing research, and she considers herself a lifelong researcher of regenerative investing. I'm seeing there a thread of curiosity, and we'll go back to that. So Sidney is the co-founder of the Regenerative Economy Communities and the Regenerative Investing Practice Working Group, both of which foster research, collaboration, and action among pioneers working on the paradigm shift in the fields of investing and economy. She currently serves on the board of the Regenerative Institute and advises the bioregional BFFS.
The bioregional financing facility.
Perfect. Supporting businesses and communities becoming evolutionary partners to life, as well as place source initiatives strengthening regenerative development and investable ecosystems. It's really a pleasure to have you here, Sidney.
Thank you, Mónica. It is my pleasure to be here.
It was great that we almost met in LARIS, the Latin American Regenerative Investment Summit. But yeah, I'm very happy also for Chris to put us again in contact and that we could get to know each other. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation. Now, I would like to go right away onto the topic that we will discuss today, which is the transition from investments in regeneration towards regenerative investing. So I would love that you tell us a little bit more about what is that shift, which economic sector or value chain it involves. What are those investments about?
Yeah, thank you, Mónica. Well, this is really a shift in perception and how we relate both to the actual concept of investment or investing in this case, and the relationship that has with the actual natural living systems. So there is a key principle that I hold after several experiments out there as I was becoming an investor myself. That is the understanding that investing is a continuum. That's the first thing. There is no such a thing as investment as a thing that we do once or twice or until we are wealthy and then we move away from it. But that the actual investing is a process in a continuum. So that's the first shift. The other one is that it becomes regenerative when it actually embeds the understanding that happens in living systems rather than something that we bring and put into regeneration or onto regeneration as if it was a separate thing from us, humans. So the basic understanding of this has to do with how our mind works, how our perception, our relationship with that shifts. And then we get to understand that there is no such a thing as we invest in impact or we invest in this territory, that we are becoming co-investors with the actual living systems. That investing is a continuing process, that it's inherent to living systems, and we humans are part of those living systems. And so we get to understand better what is our key role in this larger, broader investing field.
Beautiful. And as I was listening to you, I saw that you're also quite immersed in nature.
So this is a beautiful place. This is actually, I'm sitting out here because here supporting a process where I really learn a lot about syntropy and how syntropy gets to be a source of understanding of how different species are investing in a field. And what is then my role if I'm here to support the actual unfolding of this project in the middle of nature, right?
So what I'm noting from you is that the big difference is, of course, in that understanding that investment is a continuum, so not a single point or loose, isolated transaction, and that we are part of nature and those systems. So it's not like something that happens in top. Before we go further, I would love for you to walk us through that theory of change and impact pathway of regenerative investing, and go maybe one step deeper into how is that different from what we call now impact investing, or even investing in regenerative projects.
Yeah, certainly. So I'll be using the word investing because the ing helps us see it as a continuum. It's a form which takes us out of this is a subject or an static verb to a verb that holds the continuum in itself. So I could see this more in several projects that I started participating in that had to do with the actual soil restoration and water systems and forests, agroforestry, basically, here in Mexico, and really partnering with earth tenders, which mean the ones that are cultivating or deeply caring about earth and the way it works. And so they hold this idea of wholeness and that the wholeness embeds all dynamics. So we as investors have to learn back then that we are not the ones pushing out a plan and then financing that plan until we get to the actual presumed results, but that we got to understand what are the dynamics in place and then try and see what is the right stream that we'll as investors so that we can support the actual unfolding of the next evolutionary stage of that system. So in terms of agroforestry or syntropic agriculture, we understand that our activity in terms of agriculture depends basically on the health of the whole system around it. So as you can see, when we work with monocultivos, it means the way that we understand agriculture in mainstream. It means that the whole system depends on the factors that humans can control. And what we are seeing is that as we repeat that over and over again, we now see the soil being very degraded and the actual natural elements that could help us with that are just gone already. Water, soil, healthy earth, etc. So it becomes harder and harder to keep up with the productive activity, in this case, agriculture. While other techniques, like the one that I'm mentioning, permaculture, agroforestry, and syntropic agriculture, help us see that we need diversity, that we need to understand the relationships within that diversity so that the project can thrive. So the project is embedded in a greater system, and that greater system needs to be understood as a whole, where we actually place a human project to support the wealthiness of the whole system, right? Not only the project itself. So my colleague Bill Reed from the Regenerative Institute would always emphasize that there is no such a thing as regenerative projects. There is regenerative work within the living systems, and then there is human projects. So the actual regenerative work is not on the project itself, but the relationship that project or business has with the whole of the system. So that's where you can see, instead of placing the project here in the middle, if we can have a graph, you have the project sitting in the middle, and then you draw some of these arrows moving out and impacting economics, social, and environmental factors, to having a diagram where you can see the whole of the system, the immediate context, and the project embedded in it, and how the project actually has a response to what's needed in the immediate context and what's needed in the greater whole. So just graphically speaking, you can already see that our mind is working differently when we move to regenerative or regenerate life paradigm, rather than doing good or creating good impacts out there in the environment.
Yes, beautiful. In a way, it's very clear that the first paradigm shift is in understanding. I would almost say things as they are, because that's how it's working in reality. But maybe we do have maps that we love that are very linear, that make us feel empowered and make us think that it works in that one direction. And in a way, what you're saying is really opening to understand that investment that is happening, like you say, it needs to support those systems and their dynamics to get to the next level. And so it's non-linear thinking, it's understanding all of these interdependencies. It is scary too, because it's like understanding that you're not completely in control and needing to understand those complex web of dynamics. And as we will discover later, that gives you real long-term better results. Because in a way, here in the Netherlands, where I'm based, people were talking sometimes like building with nature, saying we have been protected ourselves hundreds of years against water, for example. And then it's like, well, we can't keep doing that because we will have bigger and bigger dikes and it's still not working. So how do we understand, as you say, the dynamics of the water cycle, for example, and flow with it, work with it? Am I right? Or in
Yes.
that way?
Yes, and it is, the understanding of the project, but the understanding of the actual ecosystem that we are investing in. And we investors might push back and say, well, I have already enough experience, so that's why I know where to invest. But the reality is that we don't know. We humans have to humble down a little bit and understand that we have a lot to learn. And it's not that we are learning from nature, it's that we are learning with nature, because we are embedded in that nature. And in a way, what we're seeing is that nature invests in itself. A tree is investing, the soil is investing, all species are investing. I love coming out here and look at the projects, because I get to spend my mornings looking at how birds wake up and how they have a role in all this. They are not actually the agriculture or doing the agriculture, they are not the farmers, but they are the pollinators. So each species has its own role. And as we understand that this is a multi-diverse and interdependent relationship, we start looking for what is the right role for humans to take on. And I describe it as for now, because it depends for each one of our listeners, our investors that are listening to this. It depends on where you are sitting that you can actually refine the description of this term, which is we are becoming co-investors in a greater field of investing, and that we have a lot to gain if we are co-investors. We are not the only ones, and we don't have to worry a lot more about risks. or returns, because we have a lot of other co-investors in the field that we take care of all that. So nature by nature is resilient. It's only that we humans have lost our understanding of going with the flow, which indigenous people would understand just naturally.
Yes. Essentially, I think it's moving from a paradigm of fear and scarcity towards one of abundance, and start to appreciate that you have other co-investors and who are humble enough to move and be part of that process. There will be others helping you, not like working against you. And now, before we go further into some of these investments and how do they take place, how do you actually come to shape not a regenerative project, but do something that contributes to regenerative work, as you were mentioning? I would love to know more about you, Sidney, because I know that behind every little advance that we have in investing in science, behind every little pioneering step that we take, there are people who have invested a lot. There are people who have taken a leap of faith and have been courageous doing what they believe. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what does your work involves in a daily or weekly manner, and how did you come to do this work?
Great questions. I don't even know how I'm going to manage to give you an answer that is short enough for this recording, because we could talk about this for hours. But I'm going to hang on to one of these ideas that you just posted that is very interesting. So it's moving out of scarcity and fear of we won't have enough, and so we have to accumulate, or we have to place all these limits and barriers so that we don't fall into unnecessary risks or we lose things. All of that is actually coming from the very mechanistic way of working with capital. By capital, I mean right now what it's out there in the mainstream. So we call capital the financial capital. And so how do I take care of something that took so much to build up? Basically, families or the heads of families that have been able to generate enough financial capital for their families, they don't want to lose that. They want to invest it in a way that it's secured and that creates as less turbulence as possible. And that increases the value of that financial resource. And so I grew up in a family of 7, and my dad has always been a businessman. As I was growing up in this country, beautiful country in Mexico, and then I moved for several years to the US and then come back just a few years ago. I think it's 8 or 9 years that I came back to Mexico to really live in the country. As I was growing up and seeing my father struggle, you can understand basically in this region, Mexico and Latin America, it's a region where everything that happens in macroeconomics really affect the economics of these countries, because there is no enough inner strength to support themselves by themselves. So every wave, if the macroeconomy is going well, we can rise up with that. If the macroeconomy is going down, then we crash with all of that. So we don't have this sort of protection that the developed countries, they call them. I hate that, but it is what it is as for now. The developed countries have enough of the financial infrastructure within them to actually support themselves through a crisis. We don't. So I could see my father struggle 3 times basically in his life and losing everything. Once we actually lost the house, we were out there homeless. So I could actually see that, and I rejected my father's proposal. When I was going to college, he said, well, you should study business or something related to it. I was like, no way. I'll get away from that as far as I can go. Why would you like to go into something that you can see in your own life? It's not good. So I went out and studied education against my father's will, and he was so pissed off. He said, you're going to die of hunger. You're going to actually not survive because no one cares about educators. No one is going to pay you a good salary for that. Anyways, I managed to have support, financial support from the university to actually go through my studies. So years later, I was invited after I studied a little bit of regenerative processes and regenerative development in the US, out there in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the headquarters of Regenesis Group is. I was invited to be part of an impact fund. So I was like, what do you want me to do here? I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about funds. But they said, well, we know about finances and we know about funds. What we don't know, it's about social environmental impact. And you know about that. So help us out. And so I started educating myself more in economics and finances and all of that so that I could actually play my part, right? So at this point, I could say that I started my career as an educator being able to transform economy in the world. I'm almost inclined to write something about that because I think education is the bottom line of all this. We have to re-educate ourselves as humans. What we learned in the modern Western society is not serving us. It's actually the obstacle from which we cannot understand the world and our relationship with it in a different way. So then I had to really get into the investing and financing piece of it and understand better what is the gap between what we have as the mainstream or the status quo and what are the gaps that we can notice between that is the current mainstream and what it's possible if we move ourselves up to the regenerate life level paradigm and source really from it and start shifting our understanding of investing and finances out of it. So that's actually the piece of my life where I decided I need to become this lifelong researcher for regenerative investing. It is an emerging field. No one out there, if they tell you, Monica, or anyone out there listening to this, if they tell you they know how to do this, that's a lie. I've been here for almost 10 years and I know very little about this. I'm still learning along with these communities that we created, the Regenerative Investing Practice Working Group and the community, the evolutionary community that we're building up along with the Regenerative Investing Academy in Europe and in America. And we are creating these communities basically out of the understanding that we need to develop ourselves better and in a deeper way so that we can actually offer something to the world that it's valuable enough to recreate our reality.
I love it. And I take from what you say first that when you say that education is crucial and that maybe the education systems and the assumptions that the education system give us now might be the barrier. That's why I believe when people talks about financing or investing that I always like to think that the understanding is the first revolution we need because that's where you are we seeing the world as it is because the paradigm that you were explaining of traditional investing or investments sounds great, but is that how it's working in reality? And the other part that I take from you is that I think the more you know what you don't know. So I'd love to be surrounded by people who knows a lot because I think in a way that curiosity keeps you humble, that understanding that there is so much that you don't know. I would like to ask, so what is your North Star? You told me an educator that is able to transform the world economy. Is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah. Well, there is a basic framework that we're still testing in our holding company, Do It Corporation here in Mexico and Latin America. And the holding company that my partners, Andre and Ibru, have over there in Europe, that it's called Atreyu. We've been testing how we actually shift the activity or the role that we hold as investors as we understand that economy investing and finance are not the same, but they're all related. So it is not the same talking about financiers or financing as talking about investing and talking about economy. So we could draw this nested circles where the actual fields of work, the greater field that I'm aspiring to have an effect on is the actual economy that I'm calling the economy of life out of this experience growing up with my family that we were living in an economy of that, an economy that actually creates wealth for a very few people around the world. And then the rest of us are suffering, or nature is suffering, or the elements are not present to actually bring a more alive reality. So that's what I started calling the economy of that. And so I had to research and try things on and put things in practice to actually come up with the theory of what is required for the emergence or re-emergence of economies of life in place. So that's what I'm holding the greater field. And that's what I aspire to have an effect on alongside all these people that are very enthusiastic about that and learning alongside with us in these communities of development. So then the mid one, the circle that it's nested within economy is investing, which is what I started with this conversation. Investing is an inherent dynamic in living systems. It's not something human made. It's not something that we can hold in an anthropocentric view, or we shouldn't at least. And then within investing, we can understand what finance has to do with that investing, that inherent dynamic in living systems. There is a role for finance there, which is a human-made construct. I have not seen ever any other species using money to do this. So yes, we can hold that role of managing wisely financial investment, but that's embedded within the investing. And then as we understand better that, we can become the ones shaping the role of finance better so that it creates the actual effects that it should create alongside other capital investing, like the social capital, cultural capital, the natural capital within systems, etc.
I understand. And so, what role do you see for finance to get to that change in the economy?
Well, what I'm holding as for now, and this is coming from several researching processes that I started with my colleagues that are holding the finances within our companies, and say, okay, what is it that money can do for us? Certainly, plants or animals or the air or the water won't eat money, which happens with other resources. Like the soil is fed by the actual movements of nutrients through the plants out here, or the animals get fed from the plant that they are living in, or the seeds that they can find, etc. But money can actually create these conditions for us to move from the current reality to the future reality. It's almost like it's buying us time. Because humans, we live in this construct of financing. And many people have told me, well, I cannot do regenerative work because I can find a job that I'll be paid for if I do this. I'm like, well, that's weird. Why would people pay for other jobs that are not creating the wealthier and healthier conditions in which we can live? And they're actually putting their money in something that it's creating the opposite. Well, we need to shift our mind and say, okay, money should be in service of the life of this living system. So putting that in that way, we would say that there is enough money in the world. There is only not, as for now, enough people shifting on the understanding of how they can use money to actually create these wealthy conditions in the ecosystems that we are in. And the ecosystem will not pay back in terms of coins or currency. They will pay back in their own currency. And it's okay because that currency, those diverse currencies are needed within a system. How do we then generate more money out of the money that we embedded in this investing dynamics in the overall system? Then that's a question that we can respond when we go and draft a strategy of investment and then go down to see how money would be used to actually achieve the goals of that strategy.
Beautiful. So I am taking, I think, from what you are saying, that from these three embedded concepts, the economy, the investing, and the finance, in a way, the way you have explained it is putting them in right relationship with each other, like the economy that is at the service of life, in which we understand and are more humble to know that we're not the only one investing, and it's a continuum. And then the question is how finance can at least be an element that incentivize more people to go towards that type of investing and that economy that we want.
Yeah, I would just say that in this diagram that we're using that we call framework, the nested systems framework, we hold that up there economy of life because that's different than regenerative economics, right? Regenerative economics equals regenerative financing. We're trying to paste on the adjective regenerative to something that it's not living. Financing is not a living system. It's a human-made construct that serves only our own way to measure the value of something. So if I have this cup or I have this computer or have my phone, I know how many pesos or how many dollars this is valued at. But I haven't seen any other species in this living world doing that. It is a human-made artificial system, which is serving us as for now. If still understanding the relationships between financial capital and other forms of capital. Then the other thing is in this framework, we use regeneration or regenerating as the ongoing instrument that would help us humans find our own way through the actual continuum of regeneration of financing, investing, and the economy of life. So again, this goes back to your first question, how we are moving from understanding that we humans are putting in money for regeneration in natural system to actually create a whole new sense of all this is related and we are embedded in all this and we only have to find the right role.
The right role, yes, to move in that direction towards life. Now, I would like that we go a little deeper into what we would call, and maybe it's not the right, maybe it's a word that we have to slowly change, but let's say deal origination to speak in the language of the financiers. Could you tell us more about regenerative investing? Which different parties make part of it? Which roles and stakeholders are needed to make it a success and sustainable over time? Are these actors different at different phases of this investment continuum?
So this is a great question again, Monica, that you're asking, because I can just share a very recent realization that we have had thanks to the conversations that we develop along with this community of co-investors within RIA, the Regenerative Investing Academy. The participants, and I hold myself within those participant group, we've been discussing on these terms the basic concepts that you get into when you start talking about financing or finances, which is the value and the return and the risk and the time that it takes Is it a long-term, a mid-term, a short-term investment? What is the level of return that you're going to get? All of that.
All of those terms and conditions of the deal.
Yeah. And they all start diluting themselves when you start seeing the broader picture and you start understanding that your role would only be helpful if you create a higher order qualitative relationship with the system that you're investing in. So what came up probably a year ago within this group in RIA is that we are moving now from understanding stakeholders or stopping talking about stakeholders, which is, I hold an interest in this, something I actually might or I wanted to get out of the system, to careholders. So who are involved? Anyone, humans and non-humans, that actually hold some level of care for this ecosystem. And 3 years ago, I happened to meet a group of people in the mid area of Mexico that actually cared for their ecosystems. So that got me to experiment a little bit with not being the one seeking for the projects as an investor. You are always trying to look for which projects are a good fit for my portfolio. How can I complete this portfolio in a nice way? And I'm taking care of my money. I'm taking care of the ones that I'm putting the money in, and I'm monitoring how the portfolio is working. As opposed to when I found these careholders, I was like, okay. So you'll tell me what's the map. And then within that mapping, I can offer something as an investor. And you'll be the ones assessing whether that capital that I can invest in you is actually the right capital, or if you need a different way of investing here. And so I have this project, and there's a small town called Acatlan, just 20 minutes away from Valle de Bravo. This is basically, or has been basically for 1 or 2 generations, town that was supporting itself through agriculture. But then after the pandemic, it really went into a shift because they couldn't support themselves or invest. They have no finance means to actually invest in their own farms. So they started selling the land. And they sold the land to the best buyer, which means the one that comes faster and the ones that gets the deal closed faster, even though they've been losing money because, of course, the buyer wants to buy in a low price. And because it was the pandemic time, they really needed to cash in. And so many of them sold their lands. I came to this place after the pandemic lockdown and started seeing with this people that care about their lands, their families, the actual watershed that holds both this town and Valle de Bravo, another tiny town that it's becoming very well known for ecotourism, which is Amanalco. They started seeing, well, how are we going to be able to preserve what we have, to preserve the wealthiness that we can see in this ecosystem, as opposed to be selling the land to these other people that know nothing about who we are or who this place is. And the main obstacle they had was, we don't have money to invest in this. We don't have money to support the actual activities that we have, but we don't want to sell it. They say the abuelos, the grandparents, meaning the third generation or the first generation, if you look at it from that other standpoint of view. They said, well, I want to keep this land for my family, for my children and their children. But how do we do this if there is no money? And so I came and I offered to actually co-create with them a financial plan, which they were like, oh, okay, so that means that you're going to lend us money. No, I won't do that. I will put in money if necessary, but we need to be able to see how that money flows and how that money is helping you create a surplus with the lands that you already own. And you are partners with me because you are the landowners and you are the culture owners and you are the actual social relationships owners. I'm a foreign here. But if I understand how all that can be included in the way we're capitalizing this endeavor for all of us, then what I can bring is the financial intelligence and the financial resources that will flow for at least a period of time between 3 and 7 years, and we'll see how this goes. So I come back all the time to check on things with them, with my co-investors, with my co-partners. And so we created a very easy financial structure, including mobile homes. And this was an idea that I had received from my now business partner in a small business that he has. And he was like, oh, what if we build tiny houses for people that would like to be a temporary resident here? And it was at the moment the boom of digital nomads. So people from North America coming to Mexico to work on their computers. And so they could actually not buy, because it's a younger generation that it's not able to have access to homes in the US because the prices are just crazy. But they wanted a home that they could afford. So these tiny houses they can afford in a country that they love because it's warm. It has natural wealthness. They can work from their computers. And so they were the actual financiers for the money that we needed so that the farmers can work the land. And they don't have to go out there and ask for loans from the bank or be worried about how they are going to sell the crop. So you see, what we brought was the side of how do we create a financial system that supports what could be created, not the other way around. How do we create a system that serves the financiers?
I love it. And I think also, and you mentioned the word partners, and I think that's it. It's like we're talking about partnerships and how do you craft those? And what I love about the term partnerships is that you're talking about equals. And I must say that although impact investing and many of the streams in finance are not there yet at the level of regenerative investing that you would like, they are taking steps from the traditional development cooperation towards a little bit more of partnership. No, I work a couple of years in an impact investing fund, and I love the fact that one way or another, these people in India, in Latin America, and everywhere, they were clients. They were not anymore beneficiaries in that term that development cooperation sometimes use. So we're not there, but I feel like the more we go towards also an understanding that the partners bring more than money, because that's the other thing also with private sector, people think they bring money. But what if what they're bringing is like what you're bringing understanding that together would make more sense than if you had it separate. So thank you for sharing that example. And I would love to go a little bit even further on in this process, right? So you talked to me and you explained this example with the farmers. But if we go more about the process of how can we have more and more places where regenerative investing is taking place, who needs to maybe shift, or what is the role that for the public and the private sector? And is there a type of strategic planning effort that takes place? By whom?
So there is an article that I published years ago, I think it was in 2022, and that it's called A Profound Way to Contribute to Regenerating the Economy, the local economies. So you can find that in Substack. My Substack is named Towards an Economy of Life. There, I draw my understanding of simple framework and how to hold these shareholders. So no financier, no economic shaper, no business owner can do this alone. And certainly we humans cannot create the change that we hope for. We have to shift from the idea that we can or that we are the resources managers, talking about roles, from the idea that we are the ones creating the ideal world, which is basically where impact investing and systemic investing is sitting. We are considering that humans have the influence and power to sponsor the ideal state of a living system. And that's a beautiful idea if you're living in Disneyland, right? But we are not. We're living in this reality. And there are so many things. There are so many factors and elements that we cannot control. The climate, we cannot control. And so you need to step out of this heroic mode. Harold Sanford would call this mode of behavior the heroic mode. And as we move out of it, start understanding how to play what I call an evolutionary partner role. This is embedded in our intro to regenerative investing course in RIA that I would love to talk more about maybe in a different episode, and we can bring the co-founders of this initiative to talk more about it. But becoming an evolutionary partner is understanding that all capitals are partnering and converging towards a higher order purpose. And that within the human species that is related to that place or that ecosystem, we can find shareholders in the community. We can find stakeholders or shareholders amongst the citizenship, amongst the private sector, like business owners, business sponsors, entrepreneurs, and the public sector, the government, the economic shapers, the NGOs that are caring for the public spaces or the common well-being. So all of them are players in all this. An example of that is I got invited to give a workshop in Chapala, which is an area close or nearby the Pacific Ocean in the middle of Mexico in the state of Jalisco. And then little by little, from a year and a half ago till now, I've been understanding what is the role that I need to play so that we can have a strategic group or a strategic think tank similar to what Samantha Powers would call the bioregional financing facilities, to understand how financing is being reshaped in service of the actual endeavor of a healthier watershed in Chapala. Lake Chapala is the largest and most important water course in Mexico. When I was invited to see this project, it was sponsored by an NGO that was looking at health problems. The problem of water being polluted and that being the source of actual health problems within the poorest communities sitting in the perimeter of this lake. So they wanted the help of us to understand how to regenerate the health of these people and regenerate the communities. And I said, well, that's lovely, but that cannot be done without partnering with the territory, without partnering with the water, without partnering with other communities. The one that is across the lake that has money but has no understanding of this place. The one that is here that has the understanding of the place but has no money. The government that cares about the problem but does not see the potential of this place and its role in the actual larger economy of the state and the bioregion. So when we start seeing all this, you can see that it's becoming a little bit a greater group and a more complex thing. So going back to education as the baseline, we all need to come into a process where we reestablish or regenerate our understanding of how to manage complex dynamics amongst us and with the whole of the watershed, right? So that in time, this is probably an investment that goes from 10 to 15 or 20 years. Of course, broke down into different phases of investment and how we see the seed investors and the investors type A or type B or whatever. But it's going to be a long-term 20 to 25-year investment. And we need the energy of all of them, and including, the species that go underneath the water. The scientists have already explained to us that the bacteria and the weeds are also investing, that they cannot invest themselves right now because the water is so polluted that they would die if they go inside the water. So how do we create with the scientists the actual conditions so that bacteria can move in the water again and do their part, and the actual underwater plants can do their part, the humans can do their part, the water coming from the rain can do its part, and so on and so forth. An indigenous population is a partner in this project because they are the holders of the actual ancestry wisdom that we need to embed in all this.
I feel like I run once a panel in COP with indigenous groups from different continents, and it was incredible to see how actually they have that memory of seeing this complexity, the understanding of, for example, the whole water cycle moving through their territory and so forth. And I feel that it's incredible how in school we learn the water cycle, but we forget it. And then we start to build infrastructures and do everything without remembering the whole water cycle, which now more and more research shows is the great stabilizer of our climate and therefore of our economies. And we were saying how those shocks in the economy, especially in the emerging economies or the majority of the world, hit quicker communities. So unless we work together, I think, to heal and recover or establish the stability of the water cycle, which demands a system understanding, we won't get there. Now, I really also love the fact that you're saying that you are trying to set up these think tanks to actually document and follow how all these different types of capital or investments done by human and non-human actors can work to flow in the direction of life. Now, I would love quickly, so that we get also a little bit into the elements of the financing, could you tell us, when we go into the technical aspects of these investments, could you briefly describe how are those investments structured? You have already said some of that, but how is that different from the traditional definition and structuring of what we call deals? And with an example, maybe 2 examples already you have given us, how is that structuring happening differently? I think you were already mentioning some of that, but if you can go once more onto some elements of structuring investments that support regenerative work versus traditional deals.
Yeah. So I cannot give you a recipe for that, Mónica. Many of the people that we have come to that come from financial institutions, even family offices, they're worried about how do we structure the flow of money, right? What I could say here is we start from the premise that, yes, you maybe need money, but is that really the actual question? Or the actual question is how money needs you, right? So we move from the actual, I need money to make this work, to say money needs you to make it work. And so we start from understanding the process, financial flows within the larger processes. Then we create a system along with the other careholders. This cannot be one man, one woman, or one group decision. It has to be understood in a coherent way. And for this, we need the other careholders. Once we have a system, then we can sit down with the investors and the financiers and create the right structure for that. So we never start with the financial structure. That's the least of our problems or our attentions at the beginning. Once you understand what is the process and how that benefits from all this, then you can easily, with a financier that has the experience and, of course, the intelligence, to say, we can do this in this way. Look, We have the type A, the type B, the type C. This is to be made in the year 1 to 3 or the year 1 to 5 or whatever. And these are the flows. Let's see if that matches the overall system. And they're the ones monitoring it. So I wouldn't worry about the financial structure. That's the easiest part. That's the one that comes after we understand the processes and the systems. If we don't start there, it's like if you were to go to the doctor and say, fix my foot, and the actual current medicine, unfortunately, would say, oh, put a band-aid on it or take this pill or whatever. But it doesn't go and ask, what is actually happening in your body? How is your body processing that pain? Where is that coming from? What is the actual system that we need to take care of? More than just the food, maybe it is the actual skeleton, which is a system, or is the skin, which is also a system. But if we don't look at it and then go down to how we are restructuring things, then we are missing the point. We're missing the opportunity to do regenerative work. And because we are toddlers here, Monica, humans are toddlers in regenerative work. And we are so engaged with it and so excited that we want to run before even crawling. So let's actually shift from what's important. And what's important is that we actually come to a state of being of abundance to understand how to reshape our financing flows and how to take care of those alongside the other careholders, because they care about the success of this as much as you care about the success of this because of your money.
I love it. And I'm also relieved by hearing you explaining this, because my own work and mission, I feel, is to enable a shift in how we do investment planning, especially in the public sector. And so it's in the boot camps that we will be having here in Europe. The first module for me is that understanding the system dynamics. And also the main shift of that mission-driven investment planning is that we are not saying, nowadays, governments, everyone with their own pots of water, energy, and so forth, they say, this is the sea of problems I have, which most of the times are symptoms. They don't even understand the root causes. And this is the very limited pot of money I have. And they try to do something with it. And I'm like, no, maybe, okay, if we understand the system, and I love the work of Bill Reed and Riyadh, that you're part of, to say, okay, let's understand the dynamics, but also instead of just focusing on the problems, let's look at the potential of these places, or at least how do we go back to their potential? Because maybe we have depleted these stocks, as you were saying, soil, water, and so forth, so much that we need to do something to get back to its regenerative potential. And then we see who pays for what, how do we make it possible? So I think what I'm sensing from you is actually the shift is, we're not serving finance. It's finance becoming at the service of life and of the regenerative work.
And being at the center. That's the other thing. We have to remove financing from the center of all our decision making. The decision making has to come from the understanding of our perception, our relationship, our right relationship with the ecosystems, and then bring in financing resources to it in the right position and in the right time, because you can have tons of money and still have no life.
That's true. A lot of people ask that, unfortunately. Now we come to the final question, which I also really is one of my favorites, because in a way it makes a big question. Imagine you would have a limited power for a day, even a week. What's one shift in how we understand systems, plan investments, or finance them that you think investor institutions could realistically start making tomorrow? And if you could drive that change, what would that be?
I'd say that it has to do with the mind, and it's not about thinking only. People have been talking about the shift of paradigm as the shift in thinking. I don't believe that. Minding means when you ask someone, would you mind? It implies that they care, right? And care is a state of being. It's not in our head. So minding includes our intellectual center, our emotional center, our spiritual center, and our moving center, which is the actual physical stuff that we do. So all of that, it's implied in minding. I would call all of you that are listening to us, all that want to become regenerative investors, all that want to pursue regenerative investing, to be mindful, meaning you're full of minding in this other way that includes all these centers, rather than just thinking better or feeling better about something. It has to be holistic. We humans need to step out of the fragmented way to relate to the world, to the natural systems. And we need to understand that we are only a tiny little piece in all this, and that all the universe and nature and the ecosystems and the ocean is asking from us is become the real you, become the real human, that it's a co-investor and a co-contributor to the life of this planet, that it's evolving as we speak. So there is no such a thing as investing in life the way we see it now or the way it was. Life is evolving itself all the time. So the only thing that we can do is invest now into the evolving stage future of the ecosystems. How do we know that? There is no magic ball. There is only minding. So invest in yourself first as you mind about this investing or investments moving forward. And then from there, bring your investment as an offering to the actual living systems.
Thank you so much. I couldn't have thought of a better way to close in. And I think back to the essentials. It's very simple, but very deep, the change that has to happen. And it starts with each of us. Thank you so much, Sidney, for being with us today. Thank you for listening to Investing in Regeneration. But before you go, if this conversation sparked new ideas for how we understand, plan, or finance projects, I invite you to take one small step today. Leave a rating and a review. It helps this podcast reach the people who are shaping decisions. And please share this episode with a policymaker, a planner, an investor, or anyone who has the agency to influence how projects are originated, designed, and financed. This is not just about spreading a podcast. It's about joining a quiet revolution, reimagining finance, and embracing a new investment paradigm that reconnects people, nature, and the economy, and places finance at the service of life.